because it's the thing that you're not aware of that you're vulnerable to. The real dangers of your life are the threats that you're not aware of, the things that you never see coming. And that's why it's so important for us to observe ourselves, to analyze ourselves, to figure out why is it that I am the way that I am. And if you're unhappy with your life, if you're unhappy with situations, if you're unhappy with the way that you are, how do you change all that? You don't change it by changing the world. We have this fixation today with trying to change everybody else around us. We want to change the world. The world has to change its opinions. The world has to change the way it talks to us. The world has to make me comfortable. No, we're tasked with finding a way to make ourselves comfortable in the world. It's fascinating to me that we're so quick to go online and call people narcissists who gaslight. We just love these phrases that are ultimately meaningless the way that we use them. And yet we don't see the narcissism in ourselves, that we're trying to change the whole world around us rather than changing ourselves. Which is going to be an easier task and a more productive task, a more possible task, to change the world or to change yourself. And that doesn't mean to conform yourself to the world. What that means is to find a way to manage your life and to live within the world. But there's a deeper lesson that's there as well. And for those of you who plan to have children someday, and even for those of you who don't plan to, but you end up having children someday, remember this. There are serpents in the garden. That's an important lesson. No matter how perfect the place is, no matter how you build the walls around it, no matter what kind of protection you lay over your children, there are serpents in the garden. There are serpents that will show up when you're not expecting it, when you can't monitor them 24/7. Today, there are serpents that will show up online. There are serpents that will show up on the bus. There are serpents that show up in your math class sitting next to you. And no matter what we try to do to protect it, they show up. And they ask you things like, so you can eat any of this fruit, huh? Did they really say that? Dude, that's a lie. No, that's not true. And you become vulnerable to things that you don't know. It goes back to what you were saying about the unresolved emotions. In other words, if there's a person that you just can't seem to get yourself over, and you're like, why can't I just get myself over this person? There's something unresolved in your past that this person represents or reflects. Could be, I'll let you wonder about what that is, but there's certainly something in the past. It doesn't even just have to be a person. It doesn't just have to be, oh, this person reminds me of whatever, some crush I had in kindergarten or something like that. The person could represent safety, security, fun, youth, experience. The person could represent a lot of things, man. It's not just a person. Because nothing is just anything. Think about those things that we're not aware of. Think about, and I wrote the word vulnerability up on the board because that's a key to this. James Hollis, as you can see, he's a psychiatrist. He's not just someone who's talking out of thin air, coming up with some ideas. This is a person who's dealt with a lot of people trying to overcome their challenges. If you go to a therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, they're not usually going to ask you questions to find out what's wrong with you. They're going to ask you questions to find out what you want to become, what you see as your own issues. You go to a therapist because you want to get over get over depression, for example. They're going to try to locate the cause of that depression, the source of it, to help you to overcome it. It won't be a matter of like, what's wrong with you? How come you're depressed? No, find out the source of it and then you overcome it. But it's that find out part that's really important, because it's the thing that you're not aware of that you're vulnerable to. If you're standing on a trolley and there's a person at the other end of the trolley and they have a baseball bat and they're threatening everybody, what can you do? Walk into the next car, get off the trolley at the next stop, because you're aware of the threat. The real dangers of your life are the threats that you're not aware of, the things that you never see coming. And that's why it's so important for us to observe ourselves, to analyze ourselves, to figure out why is it that I am the way that I am. Because you are the way that you are, not just because of things that you're aware of, but because of a whole bunch of things that you're not even aware that have you where you are right now. And if you're unhappy with your life, if you're unhappy with situations, if you're unhappy with the way that you are, how do you change all that? You don't Change it by changing the world. We have this fixation today with trying to change everybody else around us. We want to change the world. The world has to change its opinions. The world has to change the way it talks to us. The world has to make me comfortable. No, we're tasked with finding a way to make ourselves comfortable in the world. Does that mean that we don't change things with the world? No, it doesn't mean that at all, but it's fascinating to me that we're so quick to go online and call people narcissists who gaslight. We just love these phrases that are ultimately meaningless the way that we use them. And yet we don't see the narcissism in ourselves, that we're trying to change the whole world around us rather than changing ourselves. Why is it that we shouldn't focus so much on changing the world? Because it's damn near impossible. There are 8 billion people on the planet, soon to be 9 billion people. There are hundreds of countries, thousands of cultures, and you want everybody else to change just for you. That's the definition of narcissism, to use other people for your own purposes, to make yourself comfortable. And what it really comes from is a sense of inadequacy. That's the key of narcissism. You're using people to overcome a sense of inadequacy. Rather than looking at ourselves and say, there's something wrong with me, we look at the world and say, there's something wrong with the world. Is there something wrong with the world? Yes, of course. Is there something wrong with you? Yes, of course. But that second part is really uncomfortable. And of course, for some people, it's too easy to blame themselves for the way that their lives are. But the point is just, which is going to be an easier task and a more productive task, a more possible task, to change the world or to change yourself? And that doesn't mean to conform yourself to the world. What that means is to find a way to manage your life and to live within the world. But you can't do that if you're vulnerable to things that you're not aware of. This is our last quote of the semester. For some of you, this will be the last quote you ever hear from me, because you'll be transferring classes next semester. And then I imagine there's going to be a lot more people coming in next semester, because this class is very small. So some of you, this may be the last one that you hear from me. And I just hope that I don't see you on Instagram someday posting things like, man, in school, we didn't learn anything useful. How come we didn't learn how to do taxes? How come we didn't learn how to do rental agreements? You did learn how to do taxes. If you learn how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, you learn how to do taxes. But I don't understand. Okay, so you learned how to read in school. So if you can read the instructions on the tax forms to do the simple math. Oh, I don't understand it though. Man, if only there was a class that you took that's whole focus was on how to understand difficult readings. If only we had a class like that. Maybe we should teach something like that for 4 years and call it, I don't know, language arts. Maybe. I'll work on it. I'll see if we can come up with a class like that. But even just beyond that, looking back on this semester, if you took advantage of the opportunities that were available to you, what did you learn about? The very nature of existence itself. That's what we start off with. Your place in the universe. Is this a simulated universe or not? Is this world real? So we looked at this question of what's real, and do real things really matter? We're going to start off next semester with something like that, a short story about that. How do you know what's real? How do you know what matters? Well, I know the world is real. Yeah, but do you know what's real in the world? Because the things that you don't know about, that are real, those are the things that you're vulnerable to. And the lies that you believe, the fictions that you pursue that actually shape the direction of your life, those are the things that you're vulnerable to. You're vulnerable to the things you don't know, and you're vulnerable to the things that you're wrong about. And that's why it's so important to know what's real. What do we look at after that? Oh, childhood trauma. Why am I the way that I am? What shaped me? Why it's important to be shaped that way, and how do I overcome that? So why is your personality what it is? If you find yourself in we all should find ourselves in this case. There's something about me that I don't like. I don't want to be this way. How is it that I ended up this way? If everything in me says, stop being this, stop being toxic, stop being jealous, stop being so quick to anger, stop being a procrastinator, stop being so apathetic that I don't care about the world or myself or anybody around me. Stop this, stop that, stop this, stop that. I wish I was, in fact, forgetting even the stops, I wish I was more proactive. I wish I could pay more attention to detail. I wish I had more hope for a future. Because having hope for a future is within your power. That's not up to the world to give you. It's not up to a family to give you. It's not up to school to give you. That's up to you to find. And all of that probably emanates from something in you that you're vulnerable to because you don't know it. You don't remember it. It was an experience that shaped you in the past. And that doesn't mean that you have to go back and find that everything that shaped you the way you are is wrong. That's not the case. There's a lot of good stuff that shaped you as well. All of the positive attributes that you have as well. Those are also in your past, in your childhood. Those were also put into you somehow, some way. And you can build on those kinds of things. So once we figure out what's real, and then we're going to figure out, trauma and why I am the way that I am, then we look at the nature of evil. We look at psychopathy. Now, why does psychopathy matter? Because there are psychopaths in the world. And you can know it's real. And you can deal with yourself. But the fact of the matter is you also have to deal with people around you, the world around you. Psychopaths are relatively rare, about 3% of the population. That number is about to double because psychologists are now identifying a type of psychopathy that seems to be specific to women. So that number is going to go up soon. It's just expressed differently. So that number is going to go up soon, probably 5 to 6%. So you're going to, in terms of the percentages of the world, that's not a lot, but 8 billion people times about 5%, 6%, that's a lot of numbers of people though. That's a lot of people, and you're going to encounter them. And where do those people tend to gravitate towards? Positions of power where they get to be in charge. So you get to deal with those folks. So you learn the nature of evil. You learned about there are people in the world. We looked at the presence of danger, that there are people that you're going to encounter. And none of this is to say, careful, the world's a terrifying, miserable place. It's not. It's to say, if you're not aware of it though, that's what makes you vulnerable to it. And so you have to make yourself aware, just for the very fact that you won't be vulnerable to it, because the things that you're vulnerable towards are the things that you're not aware of. One of my classes recently, we were talking about some religious stuff came up in there, and one of my students was asking about the story of Adam and Eve. If you guys are familiar with this story. Long story short, God creates a guy, Adam, creates a woman, Eve, and then they're told they're living in this perfect paradise. And whether you believe the story is literally true or not, it doesn't matter. The point is that psychologically, it's absolutely true. You've got two people that are living in a perfect place, a perfect paradise. What would happen if we lived in a perfect place, in a perfect paradise? Our very nature is that we would create drama. We would create something to overcome because our minds don't do well with perfection. We as humans need stuff to overcome. So the story goes that the serpent walks up, doesn't slither up, actually walks up, because in the story the serpent has legs, and says to Eve, oh, you were told that you can eat of any of this fruit, right? That's not what she was told. She was told you can eat of any fruit except for this one fruit. And so the snake, when he asks her, you can eat of any of this fruit, the whole thing starts with a lie. Totally inverts what was said. And she says, no, that's not. We can eat any fruit except for that one. And he, the very next thing, oh, really? Are you sure that's what you were told? Calls it into question. Challenges it, calls it into question. Yeah, I'm sure that's what we were told. Okay, well, let me tell you the truth. Here's why he doesn't want you to eat it. Because if you eat it, you're going to become a god just like him. Period. Is that true? Yes, if the period doesn't stop there. The full statement is you'll become like a god, only in the sense that you're going to know good from evil. Because having done evil, they're now going to know evil. They weren't told that they would be just like God in terms of power, but that's what they thought it meant. So then she eats of the fruit. And immediately, what does she do? And hands it to the dude. And then the guy eats of it. And then all of a sudden, they realize, oh no, we're naked. And they hide. Why does that matter? Because what does that represent? Vulnerability. They realize at that point that they're vulnerable. They realize at that very moment that their ultimate vulnerability is that they're going to die. Before that, the idea was that humans were supposed to live forever. But it's the introduction of rebellion and sin that creates vulnerability in us. That means that we will die. And so they hide. Why do they hide? Because they're naked. But they also hide because the person who's going to judge them shows up. They want to hide from the consequences of what they did. Does any of this sound familiar to any of us in our lives? And then when God says, hey, Adam, where are you? God knows where Adam is. You just, ask him. And Adam's like, oh, we're back here hiding. Why? Because we're naked. They're like, oh, how'd you know you were naked? Did you eat of the fruit I told you not to eat of? Of course he knows. And Adam stands up and says, yes, I did. I take full responsibility for what I did. If you know the story, you know that's not the way the story goes. Adam goes, it was the woman you gave me. And he blames her for it. Again, does this sound familiar to any of us? And so the story goes that their punishment is they're thrown out of this garden, and they have to live now by work. They have to work the land to provide food for themselves. They're going to have life is going to be a struggle. At that point, life becomes suffering. And they got to find something to make that suffering worthwhile. And so what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that the garden was perfect. The people that were in there, everything was great. There was no death. There was no murder. Everything was perfect. And yet we find a way to screw it up. But there's a deeper lesson that's there as well. And for those of you who plan to have children someday, and even for those of you who don't plan to, but you end up having children someday, remember this. There are serpents in the garden. That's an important lesson. No matter how perfect the place is, no matter how you build the walls around it, no matter what kind of protection you lay over your children, there are serpents in the garden. There are serpents that will show up when you're not expecting it, when you can't monitor them 24/7. Today, there are serpents that will show up online. There are serpents that will show up on the bus. There are serpents that show up in your math class sitting next to you. And no matter what we try to do to protect kids, they show up. And they ask you things like, so you can eat of any of this fruit, huh? Did they really say that? Dude, that's a lie. No, that's not true. And you become vulnerable to things that you don't know. And so you have to be aware of things for no other reason except that you have to be aware that there are serpents in the garden and they're going to show up. There's nothing you can do about that. All you can do is prepare yourself for the serpents. Why do I talk to you the way that I talk to you? Why don't I talk to you guys like a 10th grade teacher? Hi guys, how are you? Why is it that if you're being an asshole, I say to you, stop being an asshole? I can't believe you said asshole. Oh no, you're right. Let me take you outside and find out what your felt needs are. That works so well, right? Because if that worked well, you wouldn't still be doing it because all your other teachers are doing it. The one guy who doesn't do it wouldn't be the cause of it. Also, I've never written a referral before. Isn't that amazing? Why? Because you guys are also human beings. And you're aware of it. I pull you aside and you go, stop being an asshole. You might be mad about it, but you can reflect on it and go, oh, I guess he's right. I don't like it, but I guess he's right. And if any of you guys came up to me and said, Scott, you're being an asshole today, I'd say, am I really? Why? Because maybe I don't know it. I don't know what I don't know. Do any of you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go to English today and be an asshole? I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to find the 2 rules that Scott has and violate both of them. I don't think you do. I don't think any of you wake up and just yawn and go, time to go be an asshole, first period. Similarly, I don't show up to a class and say, I'm going to be an asshole today. Let me find somebody. Let me find a whole bunch of people. There's a good chance that you don't know you're doing it. And there's an equal chance that I don't know I'm doing it unless someone tells me. And I do have people who tell me. I have students come up to me afterwards and like, hey, dude, a little much today. Really? Because you don't know what you don't know. And the things that you don't know are what you're vulnerable to. When they say that knowledge is power, knowledge is power. It gives you control of your own life. You can use it for evil. It can give you control over other people's lives as well. But use it to master yourself, because that's the hardest thing in the world to master. You look at people who become dictators and tyrants, and they can rule over masses of people, but they can't rule over themselves. You see people in the street marching, carrying placards, protesting, and yet their rooms are complete messes. I guarantee you, if I went to their house while they're out there protesting, their bed's not made. Their room is messy. Why? Because it's easier to tell the world what to do and to blame the world for our circumstances. Because we don't want to face the things that we don't know about ourselves. We don't want to confront the things because that makes us vulnerable. It acknowledges the vulnerability. So we walk through life pretending we're not vulnerable. We walk through life pretending like the world has to change to accommodate us. And yet, somehow we wonder why we're still resentful, angry, full of contempt, unhappy, miserable. What we talk about in here is the antidote to that stuff, man. It's not me telling you. Some of the greatest thinkers who have ever lived who are telling you these things. If you reject it, you don't reject me. You have no idea what I think, most of you. Unless you've ever asked me privately before class or after class what I think about something, none of you know what I think about things. And if you go back and watch the videos, you're going to recognize a pattern. Scoundrels seem to talk about both sides of things, whether you realize it or not. But it's not me telling you, it's the greatest thinkers of all time who have told you this. Whether or not you accept it and whether or not you use it, just like all education, man, that's up to you. But if you're ignorant of all that stuff, you're vulnerable to the effects of it. And the effects of it, well, it's death. Not literal, hopefully, right? But metaphorical, spiritual, psychological. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? You sure? End of the semester. All right. Well, happy Wednesday.